Hey, what's up, everyone? Welcome back to the Fat Muscle Project podcast. I'm John Gorman, one of three people on the show today. We got Lisa Franz in the house, where I assume you're very warm, and Cliff and I are freezing our asses off, right? What's the temperature where you're at right now?
Somewhere between 85 and 95.
Oh, so much better. Cliff, first of all, welcome back to the show, man. Like, this is nothing new for you and I. We've done so many podcasts together. You're in Chicago, and I know I'm cold. You're probably really cold. What's the weather like up there?
Oh, lots of snow, lots of freezing wind. It's
Yeah.
I'm ready for my daughter to grow up so I can just move away from here.
What's funny is I've been trying to get you to move for like, I don't know, we've been friends for like 15, 16 years. I've been trying to get you to move the whole time, but plus you're on Lake Michigan. So like when it blows
Oh.
from the north, you literally are just getting your ass handed to you, right?
Yeah, I'm like 5 minutes away from the beach, so it's freezing.
Wow.
Yeah. Well, this is going to be a fun podcast. This is not going to be a lot of like nitty-gritty details and here's how you do a rapid backload and all this kind of stuff, right? We'll probably talk about that at some point and some of the other cool things that you've kind of brought to the forefront of the industry. But this is a look back at kind of how the industry has changed. And I think a podcast like this is super important, especially from the business standpoint of coaching, because to get farther ahead, sometimes it's good to know where we came from and what those changes were. And Cliff, you're someone that I've been wanting to talk about, for a long time with this stuff. When you saw some of these things kind of happening, did you anticipate some of this stuff? So we're just going to go all the way back and we're going to start and do this by decades, right? So we're going to start back
It's
when
a
when
it's a sad day that we're talking about our sections in decades now.
right? I mean, it is because we've been coaching for a long time. I think we both got started right around the same time, 2008, 2009, somewhere in that front time. When did you start?
Um, I did my first show in 2008, and then that was good timing on you guys' drinking. Nice synchronization there. I put one person on stage in 2009, and then in 2010, that's when I was like, okay, I'm going to try to make a run at this being like a job.
Yeah, which was funny because you and our lives are like literally paralleled in the coaching industry, which we'll get more into that. But let's talk about prior to 2010, where a lot of the content was, where we were learning things, where you were learning things. Lisa, I know this is going to apply at you at some point, so obviously feel free to chime in. But Cliff, when you first wrote your first diet, either for yourself or a client, correct me if I'm wrong. Were you working at an Anytime Fitness? Were you working at a restaurant? Where were you when you very first wrote your diet?
Yeah. So for myself, I in my early 20s, I didn't really know what I wanted to do. I knew I kind of wanted to start my own business. And I did. I had owned in my teens, like while I was in school, I kind of slowly started a landscaping company. And then eventually in my early 20s, I sold the landscaping company and used that money to buy a cafe. And I kind of had like my first two clients, but they were free. They were free. I was just helping guys, and
Yeah.
I was helping them while Katie, my wife at the time, and I were running the cafe. They would come in and they would like we would be working behind the counter, and I just was like scribbling some stuff on a piece of paper, and then and then they did well. The first guy did really well. He won Mr. Illinois right out of the gate. And then we did have to close the cafe, which ended up being like the best thing that could have ever happened to me because then I was like, okay, I'm going to go all in on coaching. So then by the time I really started going all in on coaching, after the cafe closed, I was like, though, I need a job. I need something to actually pay the bills because coaching, you can't pay the bills with four clients, five clients. So I was working at a family video. It's a video store. I'm going to date myself
Yeah.
and clients. So that worked out well though because clients would come in very regularly to get their diet changed because I wasn't using email at this point. I was just writing. They would come in, they would rent some videos, and I would change their diets.
That's so funny.
one
So
one by the way
funny.
one client came in and he didn't know that I had worked there yet. He was a newer client, and he comes to the counter. I don't think I've ever told this story. He comes to the counter and he goes, "Cliff," he goes, "You work here?" And I go, yeah, because I had only met him at the gym, and we'd only started like 2 weeks ago. And he goes, yeah. He goes, well, he puts his videos on the counter. He goes, this is where I rent my porn.
Oh my
Oh,
gosh.
that's
That is
hilarious.
hilarious.
Yeah.
Wow.
It's fantastic.
Okay. Well, transitioning from writing diets while people are renting porn videos at family video, we're
Yes,
going
yes.
to transition to let's talk a little bit about message boards back then. I know I spent time on the message boards. I assume you were there. I typically remember a little bit of some of your content being on the message boards. What were those like for you, and were they important for you?
I did not spend any time on the message boards. I didn't even know they existed, to be honest with you. Um, that's Alberto Nunez. Some years later, I was talking to him, and he was like, man, he goes, everybody was on the message boards, and he goes, then you just came out of nowhere.
Yeah,
um I didn't even know there was like a community. I was just doing my own thing,
yeah,
to be honest with you. I heard later that sometimes when I started writing articles, that my articles would get posted in the message boards, but I never had like any accounts or anything like that. I set them up later. I was too so At one point, Muscle and Strength actually kind of brought me on as a sponsored athlete, if you will. This was maybe like
yeah,
2013, something like that. But that was kind of
yeah.
late for the message boards. They had me
It
like
was.
documenting my stuff there, but I was kind of just documenting my stuff on Muscle and Strength because they were, giving me free supplements to do it. And so, but I wasn't part of that bodybuilding.com community that was so big. It had like everybody.
Yeah.
My my
It's
question to you would be, how did you learn slash like where did you get new knowledge from in terms of I'm going to change this up differently or this is something new that I'm going to try or something?
I was mostly I would read magazines at the time. I liked muscular development. It was so funny. I liked muscular development because it was such a it was almost like it was all over the place. They would have research breakdowns on one page, and then they would have like a column from a meathead bodybuilder that was just talking about what he does. You know what I mean? And it was like it was the most bro and then very scientific. And I liked that. I did read that. And then I would guinea pig on myself a lot. Like I would do all kinds of crazy stuff. I would be like, let's see what happens if I eat 400 grams of protein and like no fat for a month.
yeah.
And I would just do, I still have boxes of notes, just notebooks of notes of stuff that I was trying. And then I didn't have a lot of money at that time, so I would also buy subscriptions to scientific journals. I would keep them rotated, and I would just, sometimes you would pay like $80 and you could get like a subscription. And so I would just kind of read whatever I could get my hands on. But yeah, I didn't spend, it sounds so bad, but I feel like I've always been behind the time with the trends. I didn't spend any time on the message boards really. I would just, read the magazines. I would guinea pig on myself for the most part.
Okay, cool.
You know what? I think there's something now that I know the full story. It's funny, we've been best friends literally for as long as we have, and we've never talked about this in detail because we're always talking about other stuff. I think maybe there's something there. I think not being in the same place as everyone else, right? You weren't hearing the same things we were all talking about. And even though I learned a massive amount on the message boards and all that, you went a different route and you were learning. I mean, I applied stuff to myself, right? Like ketogenic dieting and all this body opus stuff and all that, body for life. You were doing the same thing, except you weren't influenced by anyone else's thinking. I wonder if that helped fast track you. Do you feel like that fast tracked you in the trenches, learning yourself?
Yeah, I was talking to for those that don't know, Dr. Peter Fitchen. He co-authored my book with me, and he has his
Yeah.
PhD in human metabolism. We were talking about this. I didn't go the formal education route, and I didn't kind of like, I wasn't really taking part in the bodybuilding community really. And so the disadvantage of like not going the formal education route and stuff like that is that you get like a bit of information, right? And in school or even on the message boards, you get this bit of information and then somebody else comes along and says, "Hey, this thing connects to this thing." Does that make sense? And
Yeah.
you're kind of fed the next fact, if that makes sense. I think that when you're reading anything on your own, and trying things out on your own, you get a bit of information, okay? And then you have to like study it because now you're like, what does this connect to? And so I think sometimes, um, while obviously I don't have the knowledge of somebody that has completed their PhD, sometimes I think the my ability to kind of put the picture together still formed because I got to know these pieces so well, if that makes sense.
Well,
Yeah.
plus you don't have the influence of placebo, and I think we all know like how big of an effect that really plays. Like if you're already convinced something is working, it's much more likely to be working than if you're convinced it's not going to work and so on.
Yeah, yeah, and I was really open. Like I had times where I tried the Mike, like Mike Menser from back in the 70s, like one set to failure. I had other times where I was doing outrageous amounts of volume. I did low volume for a whole year and a half, and then I did high volume for a year and a half, and then I kind of compared my notes with myself. And then my clients gave me a lot of my early clients weren't bodybuilders. They were people that I was meeting in the gym, and then I was like, you want to do a show? And so they gave me a lot of leeway to also guinea pig on them as well.
Nice.
Yeah, super, super interesting. So then we're going to go from like 2010 to 2015. And this is where you and I met at 2011 in a St. Louis show. We had two really good athletes going head to head. Your guy won the pro card in first place. My guy Matt placed second. And then we would go on for years with our clients, like placing first or second. And it was kind of a war, really.
It was
Like it
back
was
and
Team
forth.
Gorman
Yeah.
and yeah, Team Gorman, Team Wilson, like our people were showing up and literally winning most things. Like it was us and a couple other people. Um, and something I noticed from you right away. So I'm always super fascinated with how other people do things, especially successfully. I'm just curious, right? And one of the things you were doing is your people were it was back before if it fit your macros was really a term, but you were just making sure that your people hit their macros. Um, I know that you weren't just letting them eat crap, but whatever that was, my guys were on a meal plan. And even though I had them counting their macros, I had them eating specific foods. Your people were showing up shredded. I think there were a few people before us, before you, that were doing that. But really, I think with you exploding onto the scene in 2010, I think it opened the eyes to me and a lot of other people like, hey, you don't have to have them eat chicken and rice. I think you and Alberto are probably the two that I would say to really kind of push that. And I think you've pushed it farther than anybody as far as awareness. My question for you is, what was that like as far as I know you had to get some hate because I got it in the years after.
Oh
I was
yeah.
like a year after you. Man, it was brutal. What was that like with your people winning everything shredded, but they weren't eating the traditional bodybuilding foods?
Yeah, and I'll say my influence on that was actually so I tried Mike Mentzer's training, from like back in the 70s, the low volume. I hated it. Um
Yeah.
I, you know, I liked the way, even though I disagree with his conclusions a lot of the times, I did like the way he thought about things. He put a lot of time thinking about things. But in his book, he had actually said that like he just counted his calories. He just like I just reduced calories. And he's like, if I want to eat an ice cream cone in prep, I just make it work into my calories. And I
Yeah.
was like, that honestly, he makes like it's like one tiny like 3 sentence blurb in his book. And I was like, interesting. And then I was like, well, protein matters. So then I kind of led me down the route of just counting calories and macros, really. Um, it was people hate not only did people hate it, people hated me for it.
Yeah.
They it was like, sometimes you get people going, I've been doing it this way for 20 years and I've never changed anything. And I'm thinking to myself, you haven't changed anything in 20 years? Like you never in 20 years thought maybe I could be doing something better. Um,
Right.
and yeah, I mean, I remember sometimes even the people that would come on because Facebook was more popular at the time. The people that would come onto my Facebook and argue with me. I remember even like Ronnie Coleman's coach came on my Facebook page just to argue with me about people having ice cream in their diet. And I'm like, and then you remember the old school bodybuilder Robbie Robinson? Robbie Robinson
Yeah.
came on my page and was like, "This is how we did it back in the day." He was like, sometimes we would just reduce calories, and it was like I was getting like people coming on my Facebook page arguing with each other, and sometimes I would just stand in back and watching them argue. Um, but it was really interesting. I never cease to be amazed at how emotional people get. They get emotionally tied to their tactics and their
Yeah.
methodology. And
Yep.
I'm just, I'm not telling you you have to do this. You know what I mean? Like I'm telling my clients they have to do this, but not you. Why are you mad at what I'm saying?
Yeah, and one of the things that we all started to see, and I'm always looking at things from a business standpoint. More people start to see this happening, right? Coaches like me made the switch, and then it starts to happen. And then my clients are winning a shit ton. Yours are winning a shit. People are eating the foods they want to eat, and they don't have to eat the six foods at work. And all of a sudden, I know I grew like crazy, and it wasn't just for that, but it was because they could try something new in prep. They didn't have to eat the same thing all the time. We were getting people in shape, and it was this new kind of model to where I know a lot of older school coaches that they didn't adapt and they kept trying to force their plan onto the client instead of making a plan work for the client. I know a lot of those people aren't even in business anymore, where businesses for us, it just have just continued to grow and grow and grow. And I think that's speaking a lot to people that don't like change at all. And that's a lot of the people that you saw arguing. I can mention a few of those people. We're not going to mention names. They're done. Like they're not even barely coaching anymore, or they're completely done and they're working for somebody else because they
Yes,
didn't
yeah.
adapt.
It's funny. That was one of the things because you remember when we first started, you and I, we didn't know if we were going to like each other or not. You know what I mean? Like we had different styles, and I remember we were kind of like watching each other. Like I don't know about this guy. One of the things that I realized I liked about you very quickly was like when something wasn't working, you just drop it and move on to the next thing. Like I really appreciated your adaptability. And I appreciated it, but also it was the thing that like when you had a client in the same show as me, I was like, ah, shit, we got to really bring it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But I appreciated and respected the adaptability because everybody else at the time was like, oh, you're doing something different than me. Like they're clutching their pearls and they're angry about it. You know what I mean? Like it was like, hey, we're gonna try some stuff and whatever works, we keep it, and then we change everything else and keep on moving.
Yeah, and I think, to get ready to go on to 215 and after, I think there's a message there for coaches that are listening because there are things that's happening right now that changes just in the business. We'll talk about AI and stuff like that, right? But there's these things that people are going to continue to resist, and this is a perfect, I think, example of why you shouldn't always resist change. I just think that we're going to preface it for the end of the show. Let's talk about email check-ins. That was something I know in 2010. People like Lane kind of paved the way to show people that you could do check-ins through emails. I would put myself, you, Jason Theobald, and people that continued to prove that, hey, you can get someone ready through email check-ins. Um, I still continue to use email to this day. It works. I don't want to fuck around and try and figure something else out because I've got a good system. What was that like transitioning to email? And then are you currently still using email, or what's your process look like?
Yeah, a lot of people weren't using email at the time. When I started, I was, like I said, doing paper changes on Family Video.
Yeah.
Um, and, it was actually Katie, my ex-wife, was like, you really need to be doing this in email. She's like, then you can just do it from anywhere. And I was like, I was like, all right, I was not and am not the most tech savvy person in the world, but at that time, I was like, okay, we can go with this. Um, I do remember a big part of the selling process. Like somebody expresses interest in coaching, and then you had to convince them it could be done through email. Um, and now you don't have to do that at all. I am with you. I still use email. In my experience, most of the best coaches now, notice I didn't say most popular coaches, but I say best coaches, still use email. They don't use a lot of apps to track everything. They just use email.
Yeah. I think it's good to stay organized too, because that way you've got a history of everything you've talked about. If you got someone texting you, Facebook messaging you, and they're sending an email, it's
Oh,
like you can't figure anything out. And I remember when you and I talked back in the day, you told me you like your clients to try and reply to the same email. So it's all in one thread.
yes, one
Uh,
thread. It's funny. I still have this conversation with people because sometimes people want to leave me. Now with all the increase in technology, people want to use it, right? They're like, I'm going to send you a video check-in and I'm going to do that. Or can we get phone calls? And they want to do this stuff. And I say, no. I say
Yeah.
no. I'll talk with people on show day or whatever. If it's peak week, we need urgent. But this is a subjective process. We don't need to add more subjectivity. I coach my younger brother and one of my best friends, Mikey Weiss, and one of my coaches. I've coached both of them for about 15 years now. When we go train or we talk on the phone, I'm like, you don't tell me about your bodybuilding stuff. Send it through an email because it needs to be in one place. And the other thing is, I think it's also, you know how it is when people get on a call with you, it becomes kind of word vomity. You know what I mean? They're just saying anything that passes their mind. I want them to also think about what they're sending me. You know what I mean? Like,
Yeah.
think about, is this data I'm about to give Cliff relevant? You know what I mean?
Yeah, I totally get it. And I know Jason Wells is listening to this laughing right now because him and I are really good friends. And numerous times, Jason's a talker and he likes to text. I'm like, dude, you better send me this in an email. Stop texting me your diet stuff, right? So like it
And,
makes sense.
and in prep too, if someone's in prep, if they get on the phone with you or get on a video call, what is a big chunk of what they're going to say? I'm hungry. I'm tired. I don't feel good. You can't tell me that as a coach, that's going to make you pull your punches a little bit. Do you know what I mean? Like that's not going to make you pull your punches a little bit. When I
Yeah.
hear, if I get on a call and 75% of what's talked about is performance dropping, hungry, tired, if that's 75% of the call, which I find it usually is, I start thinking to myself, this person's not going to be able to handle it if I cut their food. Do you know what I mean? But if they think about it in an email and they can say they're hungry and they're tired, but it's not dominating the data they're giving me, then I'm like, we need to make a change. You know what I mean? More objectivity in that regard.
And I just added something to our show notes that I want to talk about. 2010 to 2015, there was the whole metabolic damage kind of scare, but it was also, we learned a lot back then, right? A lot of that, what I want to talk about is there was a few of us that our clients were coming in conditioning that kind of raised the standard in natural bodybuilding and well, bodybuilding in general, right? People like prior to 2010 you had Brian, he was winning everything in the WNBF, and then our clients started really kind of push that standard. Theobald's clients push that standard, so you had better showed up with glutes that were completely peeled. Here's the reasoning I'm going for this, right? Metabolic adaptation and damage started to come out in like 2012, 2013, and everyone was scared to take their clients to the level they had to get them to get peeled in the sport. I don't feel like you let that bother you. It scared me for a minute because I thought, man, I've got my clients eating. And it's funny because like if I have a female that eats 1,200 calories towards the end, it's rare, but I may have to have somebody at 1,000 for the last 2 weeks, right, to get
Yeah.
where they have to get. I remember we had this conversation and you weren't really too worried about it because you knew what you had to do. Was that something that was ever a concern with you? I wish I could go back. There was a few clients I could get another 2 or 3 pounds off of if I wasn't so worried about that for a handful of years. Did you ever worry about that or did you just keep doing your thing?
I had a couple of reasons. First off, I usually just, oh man, sometimes it's a good thing. Sometimes people kind of label me an asshole for it, but I usually just don't care what other people think or are
Yeah.
doing. At the risk of sounding a little arrogant, I'm like, I trust my opinion more than other people's, and I'm gonna go with that. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so I was like, if you think, I don't care what you think about me, I'm gonna do what I do. But the thing that I tried to do is twofold. One, I had to make sure me and the client were on the same page. Um, how bad do you want this? Do you want this? You know what I mean? Like, let's start with that. Then I would take the approach of, okay, there needs to be a deficit, right? Um, there needs to be a deficit that's created. If you aren't losing weight at this current caloric intake, you are not in a deficit. And therefore, you're not in danger. If that makes sense. Like, the danger of a deficit comes when too much weight is lost, particularly too quickly. So it's like if I have client A and client B and they both lose a pound, they are both in an equivalent deficit. It doesn't matter if one person's eating 1,600 calories and the other person's eating 1,100 calories. The deficit is equivalent, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
So that equivalency made me feel comfortable with pushing forward. And then the other thing that I did was talk to my clients. This is where I get with the email. You know what I mean? Like I was like, if you start feeling abnormally bad and we are getting bad side effects, you have to tell me. Don't give me this I'll eat dirt if you tell me to stuff. You know,
Yeah.
tell me if you are having symptoms outside of the norm, you have to tell me. You know what I mean? We'll give you a refeed, we'll give you a diet break, whatever we need to do, we'll do
Yeah.
that, and then it's right back at it. So that's kind of what I did. You know, I was just like, I'm going to trust that the human body is, yeah, it's adaptive, but it's also predictable. You cut calories, you will lose weight. And so oftentimes when calories got really low, you know, either they are an extreme outlier or there's probably some extra calories sneaking in there that either I or they don't know about.
Yeah, which we definitely saw happen. I think with me, what it did was it opened up my eyes to I need to make sure I get their calories up high enough in the off season. So like in my early career, I was the guy that had a female eating 1,200. So she gave these big refeeds on Sunday and I wasn't getting her daily calories up. So, and then it clued me in on how hormone changes happen and all this stuff. But I think that was an interesting time. I think we all kind of learned from it. And then jumping ahead to 2015 to 2020, like I said, a lot of athletes, the conditioning level went up. And then all of a sudden, I saw because in 2014, if you showed up to a show, it was stacked. You had 5 to 6 guys in a bodybuilding open class, amateur, they all look like pros. They were all shredded, they were all filled out. And then after 2015, I noticed there was this massive change to where people were softer, there weren't as many people. I know there were many classes and stuff added, but I've heard you talk about this before. You feel like Instagram has kind of hurt bodybuilding, maybe, and I'm paraphrasing what I'm trying to remember you saying. Do you think people just trying to look good for Instagram has softened the ability to get as lean as you need to get if you step on stage?
Oh yeah. Yeah, yeah, yeah. I think Instagram hurt the competitors themselves and coaching. I think after 2015 really started becoming prevalent, in my opinion, like 2018, like
Yeah.
big time. Um, Multiple reasons. I think a lot of people who would be great competitors, they don't step on stage anymore. Because it used to be if you wanted to prove you were complete badass, you had to get on stage and prove it.
Yeah.
Now you don't have to diet down. You can just be reasonably lean and you have, you know, hundreds, if not thousands of people telling you how awesome you are. What's the point of getting
Yeah.
on stage? Do you know what I mean? Um, so I think that that is a factor. I think some people that would have been great competitors just don't even compete anymore. Um, I think also coaches have a lot of social pressure on them now. They feel like everyone's watching, and so they don't want to do things like take calories lower. They don't want to do things that I, and this is continuing into today, which we can kind of like touch on, but I do think that they don't want to use Instagram approved, non-Instagram approved methods. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like I can't have people knowing that I had them do this or that, you know?
Yeah, it's do you feel like the addition of the extra classes? I love all the classes that people get to compete in.
Yeah.
I personally, because I've got people that will fit into certain classes structurally, genetically, where they're currently at and they want to compete. I'm okay with that. Where 10 years ago they may not have had a chance, right? Like when I was on stage, I wish they would have had classic and men's physique because I was a smaller guy. So, do you feel like those classes, though, have cut the conditioning standards down, specifically in natural bodybuilding? I know we've got clients in all sides of the sport, right? But I think it's
Yeah.
really natural bodybuilding. Would you agree?
Yeah, there's also a lot of guys that are just they're big enough and they should be doing bodybuilding. Like I won a show in 2018. And I remember looking at the men's physique guys and there was like four of them that should have been bodybuilders. They were so
Yeah.
big. I was like, if these guys did the open men's bodybuilding, I don't think I would have, you know, place top four. You know what I mean? Um, so I think that that plays into it a lot. Is there's a lot of guys that if you don't want to train your legs as hard or you don't want to get quite as lean, you can do the men's physique division. But in my opinion, I think that genetics count for more in men's physique. Like a lot of guys say, like, oh, I'm not big enough for this or whatever. But I think that, if you don't have really round muscle bellies, you don't have a tiny waist, that counts for so much of the judging in men's physique. I think if you are built that way and you train for it, you're going to look incredible. If you're not built that way and you train for it, you're just going to be severely lacking. I don't think you can overcome the genetic advantages that that division offers.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And let's talk about from a personal standpoint. So around this, and I know I keep talking about you and I together, but we experienced a lot of this stuff at the same time. You've got, 5, 7 years under your belt around 2015, and you're starting to speak a lot. You're starting to be on podcasts a lot. How much fun was that for you personally? I know it's important for business, but how much fun was that for you to start to educate people?
Yeah, it was I don't know if you had the same problem. It was difficult to build it at first. I want to say my first handful of times I spoke, I mean, it was like 3, 4 people. And I remember Katie was like, "You need to stop doing this. It's embarrassing." And I was like, nah, I don't mind being embarrassed. It's fine. I was like, just keep moving forward. Um, but then it started to gain some traction, and I liked it, and it was fun putting the presentations together. And I think around the time you and I started the Physique Summit was when things really started to take off, and it was I think that one thing that is tough about this job is avoiding burnout when it comes to coaching.
Yeah.
And I think a big part of it is finding side projects to keep yourself engaged with the endeavor. Um, and I also I don't know about you, but every time you speak, you have to know them. At least for me, I don't do a very formatted speaking style. I think you see me speak. I don't put a lot of words on my slides because I throw a few words up there to keep me guided, but I just like to know my material and speak freely about it. And
Yeah.
but it forces me to continue to learn to be able to speak on something so clearly.
Yeah. I think it's I'm sorry, go ahead, Lisa.
No, I was just gonna say I have a few thoughts on this. So first of all, I've heard you speak as well, and I loved both your presentations that I've heard because they are so free, and you can truly tell you're just explaining and sharing the application, which for most people is the most interesting part. And I think it's amazing that you've expanded this to speaking internationally. I think you were sharing about like an upcoming speech in Greece at the time when I heard you talk, which is super, super cool. And I think on the point of burnout, it kind of ties back a little bit to what you were saying earlier about email. You've learned to protect your boundaries of like, hey, I'm streamlining all my clients through email. If you had text, WhatsApp, Slack, Facebook, Instagram, all these messages coming in, that is all that distraction. I think if we as coaches are not careful and we just think we need to go with what everyone is asking for, and you're not taking the authority of like, I'm deciding how I'm doing my coaching. Yes, I'm flexible in some aspects, but I'm deciding how I want to communicate with my clients. That's really one of the most important things we can actually do.
Yeah, that is a great point. Not only in terms of keeping it in one place, but also some people communicate better in other ways. For me, I guess that's to say is like something like a video check-in or a phone call maybe can work for some people. I know it doesn't work for me. Because like when somebody tells me something, I find that my initial response is probably not the one they usually need to hear. My
Yep.
initial responses tend to be a little blunt and to the point. And sometimes with an email, if I just have 30 seconds to think about what this person they need to hear from me and kind of temper down my initial reaction of, just get out there and get it done. It allows me to be a better coach for them as well. And so I think sometimes coaches need to, yeah, avoid giving continually giving of themselves because it's not going to do the client any favor if you can't do this job effectively doing that.
Yeah.
We've got to jump ahead to the next 5 to 10 years here and what's in the future. I do want to say one thing about speaking. I was right there with you. I had four people showing up at these Body for Life clinics at the gym. And you know what, though? Like, that's where we learned and that's where we tempered ourselves. And I remember in 2012, we all showed up in Omaha to do
I
one.
remember
And
that.
that was kind of cool. We've got a good picture of me, you, and Brian Alstrom, three nerds sitting there. And
That was
that
my
was
biggest audience at that point.
me too. Me too. And that was fun. And then we kind of went out and created it though. Like you and I got together. We were both getting some speaking engagements and we thought, okay, why don't we just get together and start the Physique Summit in 2015? And we ran it for 5 years before COVID just crushed everything. And those things were big and massive. We had 150 people showing up, the top people in the industry. My point to people listening is sometimes you have to go out and you've got to go through the embarrassment, but you have to go out and create your own opportunities. And that's what we did. We didn't wait for everybody to come ask us. And then after we started that, I don't know about you, but I got asked to speak all the time because they saw us putting on these events. Did that lead to more speaking for you?
It did. For some reason, I can't get a speaking engagement in the US to save my life. Nobody wants to hear me speak in the US. You're the only one, you and Lisa. I appreciate it, guys. But it's funny because I speak internationally like almost at least once every year now. I've spoken Greece twice and Singapore and London, and I'm going to Denmark later this year, and in talks to maybe do Argentina. But I still I don't even know if there would be a market if I did one in the US. But it's interesting because it is like you're right. I think a lot of people will quit before the good things happen because they're embarrassed.
Yeah.
Sometimes you just got to go through. I remember the first time I got asked to speak internationally was Greece, and it had only been like 4 years since I had like only a handful of people showing up, and I remember I was just starting to get some traction, and I was like, "Are you sure? I don't want to go all the way to Greece just to have two people." Showing up and being like, "Woo," you know what I mean?
Yeah.
I was like, okay, I hope there's going to be enough people there. So yeah, I think sometimes it's just the ability to put that embarrassment and put yourself out there and keep pushing through.
Yeah. Let's jump to 2020 and also talk about the future. There's been a lot happen. So for me personally, the biggest thing I learned was to start paying attention to clients' lab work simply because now I'm 48 now. I needed to start really paying attention to mine. But my clients were all getting into their 40s and 50s. And I was noticing a lot of things were happening to where they weren't in a good place hormonally. And I wasn't able to get them the results they needed. So I at least started to understand what some lab value were so I could write training and write diets and supplementation to help with that, right? I wasn't one of those people trying to go out and tell people how to change their meds. Like that's stupid, right? That was one of the biggest things that happened for me after 2020. What are some of the big changes that helped kind of either you learn something new or you went to the next level after 2020?
Um, I started it probably in like the 2016, 2017, but I even honed it in more was a lot more training changes. I really I really went into testing volume limits. I just think more people are capable of higher volume than they realize. And I think that I've almost gone the opposite way of the industry. The industry is kind of going lower volume at the moment, and I'm
100%.
diverging significantly. I always feel like I'm kind of always going the opposite direction of what everyone else is doing at the time. That would probably be the bigger thing that I've been focusing on. And then the other thing is more implementation of psychology.
Yeah.
Um, I found kind of a side passion in psychology, and I believe it or not, I'm finally like one. I believe it or not, I'm like 1 week away from a pre-sale on that book that I
Oh,
wrote.
nice. Yeah.
Yeah, and so it's like I think that you mentioned like the lab work. I find that let's just be honest, because I love bodybuilding, but a lot of people find this industry and this sport in not the healthiest mental space. They've been traumatized by something. They are very neurotic. They don't like themselves. They're I'll be happy when I have abs type mentalities. You know what I mean? I'll get so big and so strong, nobody or nothing will ever hurt me again. Um, and I've noticed a massive correlation, and the research and the data shows this too. between someone's psychological well-being and their physiological well-being. A lot of times, if you can get someone's mind to a better spot, the body follows suit. So in two regards, right? Just the improved mental health leads to improved physiological health, but also they usually stop doing damaging behaviors as well. I spend a lot more time on the psychological aspects with my clients.
Yeah, and then finally, what do you think, if we talk about all these change points, right, over the last 15 to 20 years that have kind of moved the industry forward or changed the industry, what do you feel the next thing is that may can make a big shift in the industry?
Oh, you said it earlier, AI. I think AI is going
Yeah,
to put at least the bottom 50% of coaches out of business.
agree.
Um, the other thing is that I think that for quite a few years now, a lot of business coaches have been telling coaches to charge more and more and more and more. And I believe that that mentality has already started to drive a lot of people out of the coaching market for years to come.
Yeah.
I think there's a lot of times where people are going to be like, yeah, I was paying a coach $500 a month. I didn't feel like it was really worth it. And they're not going to be looking for another coach for at least 10 years.
Mm-hmm.
I have talked to a lot of people who were making great money as a coach. They were charging too much. And now they'll even say things like, well, I'm having a harder time getting clients. I just have
Yeah.
to accept I'm not going to make what I used to. I think people have gone through their approach with coaching has been, I'm going to extract as much money out of each person as I possibly can. Um, and it's a very short-sighted business tactic in my opinion. And so I think that between AI and a diminishing coaching market, I think only the most skilled coaches are going to be left still making an income off of this job.
Interesting. I watched somebody, one of our colleagues that was at the top of the industry as far as being known back in 2010, and I watched him raise his prices so astronomically high that his client list went down. And he's went on to do really good things, right? He's got a large following. He does really well for himself, but his client base went way down. I've seen other people try and do exactly that, like you were mentioning. And I think the whole key to longevity here is you have to keep an active list of clients going. It's not about charging a bunch, having less clients. You've got to keep those clients going because they're your source of referrals. They're your results that you can post. They're literally everything. I
Mhm.
like to keep 60 to 80 clients on hand at all times because that's what feeds all my businesses. Do you agree with that? That having a whatever that full load is for somebody is more important than how much they're charging trying to get less
Yeah,
clients.
yeah, and the other thing is that good people, because here's what I'll tell you: you can charge a great client $250 a month, and you can charge, let's just be honest, a bad client $500 a month. Usually, the bad client takes up more than double your time
Yeah.
of a $250 a month client. Um, Keep your good clients at all costs. Not only the great sources of referral, they usually don't eat up all your time. And then, like we also talked about, like protecting yourself and boundaries. I literally started up somebody 2 weeks ago, and I was explaining to her like how this process worked, and she was mad that I was like, I'm going to take time to teach you how to count your macros, and she's like, she gave me an email that was really rude, to be honest. Like, no, that's not how this is gonna work. I want you to write me a meal plan. And I was like, here's your money back. We're not doing this. You
Yeah.
know what I mean? Like I think part of staying in this business is also not burning out, letting people use your energy up. Keep your good clients at all costs. They keep you going, and once again, they're less time consuming than your more troublesome clients.
Yeah. And then finally, I know we got to wrap up here. What do you have coming up? Is there anything that you want to pass along to anybody? What do you have coming up? And then if people
Yeah.
click on the show notes, they can see the link to your website, the link to your Instagram. Those are the best places to get in touch with you. But what's coming up? What's new with you?
Yeah, we've been making a lot of updates to the Raw Intensity app. The Raw Intensity app, I still say that I think a lot of apps out there are focused. Almost every app out there is focused on, is this easy to follow? Is it's more towards the moderate crowd. I think we're the only app that is geared towards the very intense, serious gym going crowd. You don't need to be a
Yeah.
competitor, but right now, about 70% of our users are off-season bodybuilders.
Wow.
And so, I think it's the only app that caters to that group. And I do have my new book coming out. It'll be for pre-sale on my website in about 1 to 2 weeks. So
Okay.
I'm excited. That one's been too many years in the making at this point.
Yeah, for sure. And we'll push that on our end as well. Just make sure to tag us. So, man, this has been fun. I'd like to come back on and actually have a whole episode about training volume and your thoughts over training over the years. I think that would be a great podcast.
That'd be
But we're
great.
gonna go ahead and shut this down. Stay warm up there. Lisa, you suck. It's 80. I know you're going to go enjoy the sunshine. From all three of us, we'll see you guys. Have a great day.
All right, guys.